3 months on, and Australians finally have the TRX-4m 1/18 scale trail rig. I ordered this as soon as it was announced, and it's finally here. Let's take a look at it, and let's look at some other 1/18 scales and just see where this thing fits in to the RC family. When the TRX-4m was announced, I was excited because the modern Traxxas company of the last few years at least has been very much focused on fun, durability, capability. It's almost like a whole new company to what it was a decade ago. And you can see how I feel about some of the older stuff from one of my recent videos. The new stuff is a lot better, put it that way. Now the TRX-4m isn't just another 1/24 scale, and in fact it's a 1/18 scale. And as you'll have seen from a recent video when I had this next to a 1/24 scale RGT, she's a little bit bigger. Now, there are some other 1/18 scale rigs on the market, and we're going to look at the Capra real quick just to show off how very different these machines are. These are both 1/18 scales. Clearly the more expensive, crawling focused competition Capra is just a different beast from this, but they do share the same scale. We have the WPL-C24, which is a proper hard body styrene crawler. It's got 4 links in the front and a chassis mounted servo, which kind of wrecks its steering. Its suspension sucks, and even though we've fixed up its gearbox, as far as cheap fun goes, let's say it's high on the scale and low on the capability. It's certainly an attractive thing, and it is certainly cheap. You can get these things for so little money if you wait for sales like I did. But they're really not crawlers. They're for trail and just for dressing up. They're not particularly fun to drive unless you happen to have just the right trails for it. Now, one of my earlier videos on this channel was of the Easy RC Patriot, an 80 series Land Cruiser. Now this brings us very close to the TRX-4m, and this is actually the interesting one I wanted to discuss because these guys have a lot in common. But have a look at how similar the Patriot and the TRX-4m are. They're similar tires, no foams in either of them. These ones aren't glued, just like these ones aren't glued, I noticed. We've got 4-link suspension front and rear on both. While this thing does give you a light kit, and it's got some interesting little extras in it, such as an opening hood, your battery goes in there, and you do have a full interior, their pricing is quite similar. But I like what Traxxas have done. This is not technically a hard body as far as we count hard bodies these days. Styrene is really what we count as a hard body, but this is not polycarbonate. It's an ABS shell, and both this and the Bronco come in a variety of colors, but I'm pretty sure the color is injected, it's mixed in with the actual plastic. It doesn't seem to be painted. I tried an innocuous scratch on either side in a few places. I couldn't dig below the color. It's this color all the way through. So the good news is with ABS, it's very hard wearing, very durable. It kind of is hard, but it's like a hybrid between a hard body and a soft body, like a Lexan body. I quite like it, and it also gives you the integrated windows and windscreen as part of the body. So it's not like with this stuff where you have a separate piece of plastic, or you have to install the windows as separate pieces because gluing can be an issue. This kind of gives you the best of both worlds. You have rigidity, but you also have some of the benefits that polycarbonate gives you. So I really like that. We've got nice bendy plastics both above and below. Now, while people like to have metal links, there's something to be said for these plastic links. And we were looking at the was it the Capra? I think it was the Capra when we were looking at that. See, even Axial's got a reputation for these bendy, noodly links. They actually contribute to a vehicle's longevity, so that was pretty sweet. I like the scale appointments you get on this thing as well, and I particularly like that you can lift this thing off. I mean, again, if you're watching this, chances are you've seen this thing before, but if you haven't, it uses the same kind of latching system that you'll find on the 1/10 scale Traxxas. Usually you get one of these on each corner on the big scale vehicles. This is just one at each end. It just presses in and releases from a clip. That's great. Still, it's not perfect, but for I think $150 US, it's really not too bad. In the box, as well as the manual and the warranty cards and bits, the standard tools you get with Traxxas, and you get a 2-cell charger. Now they've got and created a proprietary battery interface. We have a pretty well established system with batteries, which is one of the common connectors. It could be a T connector, an XT30 in this case, and the balance plug. These are important because chargers really want to have a storage charge cycle. So when you're done with your LiPo, you put it on storage and it brings the cells down to around 50% charge, and then they can be left like that for a long time. If you leave these guys empty or full, the cells degrade and eventually they're not useful. So one of these chargers, you kind of have to guess. You need to kind of half charge it. You need to work out how long it takes to be full from flat, and then cut your charging time down to about 40% of that to get this to about half charge. I wasn't happy with that, so I carefully cut each of the 3 wires. This is the plug that came with the battery. You got 3 wires on it. There's a ground, first cell and second cell voltage, and that's how your balance leads work on all the chargers. This is a standard. I don't mind new standards. Traxxas has their own ecosystem, which is great and all, but this charger not having storage means it got the chop. It just had to. So I've basically converted this 3-way plug into a balance plug, and I could have left it at that, but I also wanted this to be compatible with modern balance chargers, which means it needs a battery port. The battery port is really just the bottom 2. It's positive and negative. The middle wire being your first cell. It's a 2-cell battery, so you've got ground and the first cell, ground and the second cell. And that's how your chargers work out what each cell's doing, and they need to be kept roughly the same. So that's how you run a LiPo safely. To use this thing in the car, I basically just put this balance lead in between the original wiring and the plug. So this thing still works. It even still works with the original charger, which I'm not going to use. I'm going to use my balance chargers. And it works with the car. It goes straight in there and happy days. I didn't have to change the model. It's just good to go. This was easy to do. If you're not used to soldering though, I would caution you against doing it. There are probably adapters you can buy. But if you do it yourself, just remember not to do the easy mistake of getting your snips and snipping all 3 wires at once. Do what I did if you're going to do it. Snip the first wire, solder it onto the new connector. Heat shrink it, done. Snip the second wire, repeat. Third wire, repeat. And that is how you can do it safely. Only proceed with this if you know what you're doing. Proceed at your own risk. But I would say, it's a worthwhile upgrade. The car also comes with the most basic TQi radio. You get steering trim, and by using the set key, you can also change a few other trims, endpoints and whatnot. I've spent a bit of time with this already. There's not a ball bearing to be seen in this model. I wasn't too sure about that because the nylon shims that come in the Tamiya models kind of made me think, oh, is this going to start to grind itself down? But no, you can see it. They're actually metal shims. So they're not maybe as nice as ball bearings for flow, but keep this in mind. This is not a fast car. Everything is slow, so even if you've got mud and crud inside, you don't need the extra little bit of freedom that you get on like a fast car. I would say this is maybe not as bad as it sounds. There are 2 things that I think are not ideal in this car, and they're only my 2 nitpicks. The first is that there's a O-ring, little rubber O-ring here over the ends of the drive shaft, which holds the pin in the middle of the CVDs. If that gets cut on rocks and you lose it, your pin will fall out and you'll lose half your drive shaft. That's not ideal. Even the cheapest cars use the more traditional setup of having well, this is a nasty big screw even, but they still managed universals without needing a ring to capture the nut. That's, I think, an unfortunate choice that Traxxas has made. They could have made it nice and neat. I mean, they're still even using a Phillips head screw, but you get a universal, even though it's plastic even. That's not going to have this problem. The second thing I'm maybe gently concerned about is that this composite plastic is also what the gears are in the diffs and in the transmission. Transmission's fairly forgivable, but in the diffs, which is really where there's a lot of force concentrated on that pinion and crown wheel, it would have been nice to see them metal. The good news is the aftermarket already has parts out for this. Again, I've only just got this, but it's no longer a brand new car. It's been out for 3 months and there are already upgrades for it. And in fact, on my desk, I've had upgrades for this thing sitting there for longer than I've had the car. I could get all the parts for it before I could even get the car here. The composite gears, if when they break, I'll fit the metal ones. Good enough. Speaking of gears, Traxxas makes speed gears for this transmission, and they make low down crawling gears for this transmission. And I think the the ratio for it is 1 to 41 or so for the crawling gears. So this thing will run you at walking pace. The 180 size can, it's a long can, gives you extra torque. Same size motor as the Easy RC Patriot, a long can, 87 turn. You can't change the pinion, so you can't move the motor around basically, but you can change the motor to get more turns. I would say if you're going to go with brushed, this is probably fine. You can fit the aftermarket gears. They become available in April this year, 2023, so that might be something worth doing if you mainly want to crawl with this thing. I certainly will be dropping to the slower gears because slower for me is better. It'll be longer battery life too. Servo sits on the axle. It's an interesting kind of mount they've got for it too, but they've got the drag length up nice and high, and there's a 45-degree steering angle. You've got plenty of reinforced plastic in the front parts, and they also are removable. These knuckles here are held in with screws, so if you do break something you can replace them without needing to replace the housing. Even the front diff cover comes off, which gives you access to the diff gears. I'm liking most of that. One thing that stands this thing aside from the smaller stuff, generally speaking, is that you get oil-filled shocks. That's rad. There are two different springs. They've got a softer spring in the rear and a slightly stiffer spring in the front because you've got the motor and the servo up front. But they're both soft, and it's a very light oil, whatever they're using. Like, it'll be 30 weight at the highest. Since I'm holding the car, I can tell you that the bumpers are held on with one screw on each side and one plastic piece that kind of fits it into the mold, and they're very loose. But everything about the rest of it is actually quite firm. It's a C-rail 7mm steel chassis, mild steel, and with the cross members in different places, it's plenty firm enough. I said I had a bucket of upgrades sitting around. I've only made one change to this thing since I got it, and that was to stick in INJORA Lights front and rear. We haven't got the Pro Light kit. I do have the Pro Light kit on some other bigger scale Traxxas stuff, and it's really nice, but I don't mind just having red in the rear and white in the front, and I don't need any further control than that. Just having those lights on the body is fine with me, and they will run just fine from the light control. And that was very easy to plug in. You just put the wires in and zip tie it to the little, there are like little ports available, little loops that you can zip tie wires to. It made installation an absolute breeze. So when I stick the body on, I simply am plugging it into the controller and then banging it on. It's as easy as that. Really straightforward. This is an unusual setup, but it has room to have a different kind of strap over it if this thing eventually dies. Oh, and the last thing to tell you is the electronics side. There are 3 modes with this sucker. If you're not aware of it, what do you got? You got Sport, Trail, and Crawling. Sport gives you it's got the same drag brake, which is 100% drag brake for all 3, I think. Sport gives you forward, brake, and reverse. Trail gives you forward, brake, and reverse, but also a drag brake that's got a lower rate. So if you're customizing your bigger ESCs and you've got the drag brake strength, you also have drag brake rate, which is how quickly that drag brake ramps up and gets to your preset level. So on trail, drag brake rate is lower, so it'll cruise to a stop in neutral as opposed to just locking stopped. And you've got crawl, which is just instant drag brake, instant forward and reverse with full drag brake. I think the other 2 modes are probably a lower drag brake. So what we're going to do now is plug this thing in. I'll strap it in. The only downside of what I've done with the wiring here is it adds extra stuff to manage, but it's easily enough taken care of by just putting it all underneath like that. Plugging it in is basically its on-off switch, and there are my lights. we're in full late summer sun here, so it's harder to see. But I'm happy to have lights front and rear, and that's really all it is, and that's good enough. 45-degree steering. It's actually a fairly decent turning angle, honestly. And top speed's not terrible either. And as you can see, I've got it set to crawl mode already. Let's get this thing on some rocks and see what we think. Where does this thing fit in the 1/18 landscape for RC? It's certainly nowhere near as capable as the Capra. It's vastly more capable than the Poro WPL C24. And it's similarly priced, but better in, I think, every way than the Easy RC Patriot. The value for money, I think, is there. It's not what you'd call a budget small car, but it is a lovely small car. And all the upgrades available for it, I think, really make this thing an interesting and compelling buy. I'm looking forward to changing out some of the bits for metal and just seeing how slowly I can make this thing crawl. For trail fun though, I'm very happy with it. Throw me a like if you enjoyed this too, and I will see you again real soon on RC-TNT. Thank you for watching.